He was on display for everyone to see in the biggest staged perp walk I've ever seen in my career. And to have all of the press there, the media there, it was like perfectly choreographed. And what was the New York City mayor doing at this press conference, Your Honor? That just made it utterly political. And as
I never know. I was very clear not to talk to him. I was very clear not to say anything. I wanted to look into his eye.
Since the dawn of mankind, committing a crime has meant doing the time, often in the full view of the public. Unless, of course, you live in one of these European nations today, where not just the accused, but even those convicted of serious crimes have their names, faces, and any identifying information shielded from the public. So why do some countries and their media organizations scour the internet for any small detail, video, or photo of the accused criminal, while others deem this practice illegal? Is this form of public shaming effective or counterintuitive? And at the end of the day, do violent offenders have the right to be forgotten, or should they be given the gift of infamy? Well, let's take a look. The aftermath of any crime in many English-speaking nations, like the United States, Canada, and the UK, it is a literal media frenzy for information. Who was this person? What kind of connection do they have to the victim? Where do they work? Do they have a family? Has this happened before? These questions and so many others stem from multiple different reasons. On the one hand, the public is trying to reconcile what happened and reasonably identify if there were some safeguards or systems that failed to protect the victim or victims. So naturally, we ask questions. Did this person slip through the cracks? Could this have been prevented? After all, as a public, we want transparency in order to ensure fair trials as well as public understanding of and trust in the criminal justice and policing system. But on the other hand, the public is also trying to understand the state of mind of the accused and whether or not there were any justification or rationale to their actions. But subconsciously, we are also trying to shame the person who committed the crime. A human impulse frequently featured in Hollywood films and iconic works of literature. Far more often than not, any accused person is tried in the court of public opinion before they are judged in a court of law. But this isn't a new phenomenon. In fact, quite the opposite. Shaming an individual for their crimes is quite literally biblical in nature. The fall of man in Genesis initiated shame as a constant human experience. Sin itself is described as leaving the sinner in a state of shame, isolation, and rejection before God. And there are numerous examples in the Bible of humiliation and public disgrace being endorsed as a means of atonement for criminals and lawbreakers alike. So when we fast forward through history, we can see how this religious virtue of shame as atonement influences our laws and the punishment for crimes directly. Punishment was designed to humiliate offenders, deter others, and reinforce community norms through public spectacle. In fact, in medieval Europe and the American colonies, common methods include pillory, stocks, whipping, branding, and carting, often in busy marketplaces. This was often chosen over imprisonment, which was rarely used as punishment itself, but rather more so for debtors or for simply holding people before trials. In colonial times, almost every town had instruments of humiliation, again, typically located in the town square. And those punishments were frequently accompanied by crowds throwing mud, rotten food, and excrement. Now, thankfully, these forms of dehumanizing public shaming sentences began to fade around the time of the American Revolution, though there are some that still continued into the 1800s. Most experts point to the fact that the Industrial Revolution and its accompanying urbanization and migration undermined the use of public shaming because people no longer feared the condemnation of their communities. Imprisonment became the punishment of choice. Yet, states like Pennsylvania and Massachusetts still tried to shame prisoners by allowing the public to watch them as if in a zoo. However, many critics of the contemporary criminal justice system argue that the shaming hasn't actually really stopped. It's only shifted. Like an invisible yoke around the neck, in many nations around the globe, your criminal record can and will follow former offenders forever. And the advent of the digital age with unlimited information, social media, and the 24-hour news cycle has also amplified shaming with a decidedly modern twist. In the US specifically, it is entirely legal to operate Facebook groups that repost mugshots with the accused's name, offense, with comments and reactions turned on for the jesting and jeering of the public. And listen, I am not condemning nor condoning. I just ask that you keep in mind that these people have not been found guilty of their crimes yet. They are still technically innocent until proven guilty, and statistically, many of them are innocent, yet nonetheless being fully judged in the court of public opinion first without any say in the matter. I mean, think about it. If the media splashes your name and face everywhere before a conviction and you are later acquitted, the damage is permanent. Your reputation is ruined. Employers remember, neighbors remember, and Google never forgets. But there is a flip side to this coin, one which I think many would find reasonable. In 1996, the US enacted a federal law known infamously as Megan's Law, which requires the release of relevant information to protect the public from a specific brand of violent offenders. I would like to not get demonetized, so bear with me here. I'm not going to go into the details, but the relevant crime which this law is named after is any parent's worst nightmare. So resultantly, the purpose of this law is to authorize law enforcement to notify schools, community organizations, and neighbors about high-risk offenders in order to prevent tragedies like this from ever happening again. This is, by the way, a 3-tiered system, which influences the extent and the method of public notification, as well as the length of time. But on the extreme end of things, all of your information, name, date of birth, address, crimes, and photograph is presented to the public without request through press releases, mailings, or internet postings. And you're on this list for life. Your passport is even marked, and foreign nations are notified when you travel there. But this example, albeit again extreme, serves to illustrate the continuum of public protection and individual privacy, and all of the points in between. It's sticky, it's messy, and perhaps unsurprisingly, the Supreme Court has actually had to weigh in on whether or not these kinds of public consequences are legal and ethical. The Eighth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution prohibits the federal government from imposing excessive bail, fines, or cruel and unusual punishments. It also forbids barbaric methods, disproportionate sentences, and torture. Furthermore, the 14th Amendment guarantees all citizens due process and equal protection of the laws. And so it's relative to these two provisions that the case of Connecticut Department of Public Safety versus Doe was brought before the United States Supreme Court in 2003. Convicted offenders, represented by the pseudonym John Doe, argued that being labeled publicly without a hearing to determine their current dangerousness violated their procedural due process rights. Furthermore, the plaintiffs argued that research has consistently indicated that offenders experience the public distribution of their identity as a secondary, often more severe punishment than their original prison sentence, rendering Megan's Law and subsequent registries as cruel and unusual. However, in a rare, unanimous 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that because the law required registration based on conviction record alone, not on current dangerousness, a hearing was not required, nor a violation of the 14th Amendment. Furthermore, the court concluded that the registry was non-punitive, regulatory measures, and mere injury to reputation does not violate the 8th Amendment. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't defend the plaintiff's actions. Certainly not for someone convicted of willfully harming others. But any time we're establishing punitive measures for crimes, we also want to make sure that they work and are consistent with improving community safety. So it is interesting that research does consistently support the conclusion that the public shaming of prior offenders leads to increased, often severe harassment, loss of housing, and employment. Furthermore, research also generally indicates that community notification does not effectively reduce recidivism, and by disrupting the stability of offenders, we may actually increase the risk of offending, which begs the question, if the goal is keeping the community safe, what are we doing here? Do we as a society believe that someone can truly be rehabilitated? If so, then technically it isn't my job to do it. Certainly this is a bit altruistic, but that is what the corrections system is for. But if not, if there is no amount of punishment or rehabilitation that can fix the underlying issue, then why are we allowing offenders back into society anyway, where public shaming as a form of social control is necessary? Now, while I'm asking these rhetorically, these exact questions and uneven answers are precisely why this practice of naming names is not universal. And while we're on the subject of privacy and data protection and crime, it feels like the perfect opportunity to remind you that your online digital footprint isn't just a liability for your own innocence, but also an opportunity for you to become a victim as well. Despite guidelines indicating how people's search sites should and shouldn't be used, criminals have been known to use the information on these sites to target their victims. One identity thief used the data of 51 individuals, which they acquired from a people search site, to take out thousands of dollars in fraudulent loans. Unless, of course, you use the invaluable tools from the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. Incogni tracks down and removes your personal data from multiple sites, including online directories, people search sites, and even commercial databases. And I don't have to do anything. They do all of the legwork. Just sign up and give them permission to act on your behalf, and then they go out and find the list that you are on and demand that you be taken off. Plus, if you sign up for their unlimited plan, you have access to their custom removal feature to take down almost everything that is exposed about you online, like your home address, age, and birthday, for example. Incogni is a proven solution for keeping your identity safe from shady characters, and they are the first and only data removal service to be independently verified by Deloitte. They do what they say they do and actually remove my unwanted personal data online, which is why I have been a loyal member of Incogni for years now. Plus, I can actually use their dashboard to see them working in real time as they continue to guard my privacy, which makes me feel so much safer. So if you too want to take back your privacy and personal data, use code Ashton at the link below in the description of this video to get a big discount, 60% off the annual plan. This is likely going to sound especially weird to my American viewers, but foreign journalists respect that even after conviction, once criminals have paid their debt to society, they should be able to rejoin their communities free of stigma. Ethical journalistic practices and policies in many European nations are built on the notion that anyone can make a mistake, and that even convicted criminals deserve a chance for redemption and reintegration into their community. And so when you look across countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, etc., the big difference is that citizens and journalists alike largely trust their governments, the police, and the criminal justice process. And this is reflected in the way that we tell stories and remember them as well. I see it all the time. When I open up a German newspaper or watch the nightly news report from a German broadcaster, the accused or even convicted are often referred to very vaguely. For example, you'll see headlines like a 35-year-old woman from Baden-Württemberg, or the suspect referred to as AS, and heavily blurred photos or simple silhouettes in order to protect the individual while that process is ongoing. In the meantime, the media still reports on what happened, what crime is alleged, how the authorities are handling it, for example, but without making the accused person identifiable. That's the compromise. Trust in the process. The court decides guilt, the media informs. Carefully. But media coverage isn't always absolute. And even in instances when there is a genuine public interest in knowing the identity of a criminal, that interest isn't necessarily forever. In the EU, we have what's known as the right to be forgotten, which allows individuals, including those with criminal records, to request that search engines delist to or erase outdated or irrelevant personal information. While it's not an absolute right, it is applied under the GDPR and similar laws when past criminal information is no longer relevant, allowing for rehabilitation. Courts here have to weigh the right to privacy against the public's right to know. For example, if a convicted person continues to act in a way that suggests a risk of reoffending or holds a public role, that information may still remain online. But if significant time has elapsed since the crime, even if the original information shared was truthful, we have to ask ourselves whether the general interest or public relevance still exists. In some instances, such as in Germany and France, the courts have upheld a murderer's right to be forgotten after they served their sentence, facilitating the scrubbing of information from public search engines and redacting the offender's name and face from past publications. Now, the GDPR doesn't exclusively concern criminal law, but it does also dramatically limit how police and courts can store and share identifiable information too, ensuring privacy and retention limitations unless there is a clear legal justification. So that's actually why here in Germany specifically, because this is where I live now, we do have criminal databases and criminal records for offenders, but they aren't publicly available. Instead, Germany's Federal Central Criminal Register is only accessible by courts, public prosecutors, and certain authorities. Now, you can, and sometimes may, be obligated to produce something called a Führungszeugnis, which is a kind of certificate of conduct or limited background check for employers. For example, if you want to go work at a school or work with children, this is mandatory. I actually had to do this when I worked at the University of Freiburg and also again when I applied for German citizenship. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, I am not an international super spy or criminal mastermind. My history is extraordinarily boring.
I wrote a character just like you once. He was a spy.
I'm not a spy.
That's what the character said.
But it is worth mentioning that within specific timeframes, some convictions are removed from this register entirely or excluded from those certificates of good conduct. Once again, giving individuals a second chance. But listen, I get it. Thinking about giving someone the luxury of privacy after they have done something so terrible can be impossible to reckon with. Which is why I think this final story may give even the skeptics amongst us some pause. In April 2009 in the Netherlands, a Dutch man stole a car and headed towards a parade in the small town of Apeldoorn, where the Dutch royal family was riding in an open-air bus through crowds of well-wishers gathered to celebrate the Queen's birthday, a national holiday. While national and local television cameras rolled and news photographers documented the lighthearted event, the man rammed the car through police barriers into the crowd of spectators, ending the life of 7 people and seriously injuring 10 more before crashing into a monument. The perpetrator of the crime passed away the next day of injuries sustained in that crash, but not before he confessed to police that he had intended to assassinate the Queen. But here's what's interesting. Despite the very public spectacle and danger to a head of state, few Dutch men or women actually ever learned the man's name, especially if they had only relied solely on the coverage provided by national news outlets, which only referred to him as Karst T. It was primarily only US and UK news agencies who published his full name and face. Why? Well, technically speaking, it isn't against the law to do it, but they refrain from doing so because ultimately, they don't want one person's heinous and insidious impulses to influence or inspire others. Detailed media reporting of violent crimes, well-intentioned or not, nonetheless provides a cultural script or blueprint for disturbed individuals to emulate, helping them understand how to act out their own violent fantasies. And research tells us that copycat crimes are statistically significant. In one study conducted by the University of Central Florida of 574 male and female inmates, 22% admitted to committing a copycat crime. Keep in mind, these acts are rarely exact mirror image replicas. Instead, inmates indicated that media reporting inspired or conferred things like motivation, technique, or setting. And copycat crimes aren't isolated to one particular type of crime. This same study listed many examples, including gun violence, bank robberies, racial and political disturbances, riots, and even military coups. Now, don't get me wrong, not everyone who watches violent media becomes violent. The difference lies in individual psychology and circumstances. The media doesn't create criminals, but it does attract them, which is why world leaders and concerned citizens alike caution the media from giving criminals the gift of infamy.
I want to ask the media to avoid mentioning the name and showing the picture of the person involved. Do not give him the gift of infamy. Let us instead focus all our intention and attention on the lives we lost and the families and friends who grieve.
But this position is slowly, yet noticeably, beginning to enter the conversation in the US media as well. Many survivors and family members of those who were affected by the tragedies in Aurora, Colorado, and Parkland have championed the #NoNotoriety campaign, which encourages news organizations to minimize harm while reporting on mass shootings, including limiting the use of the perpetrator's name to, quote, once per piece as a reference point, never in the headlines, and no photo above the fold, end quote. It isn't the same as the near total anonymity featured here in many Western European nations, but it is a start. After all, I think the most important thing to keep in mind surrounding the protection of privacy and sharing of information on any crime should ultimately be about the protection of the victims. Crime, especially violent crime, is extraordinarily traumatic. And while the media coverage may be well-meaning in their intent to inform the public, rarely are publications stopping to think about how publicizing the crime and the perpetrator further violates them, and sadly inspires others to create more victims. It is certainly a heavy topic in today's video, but I think it's one which inadvertently is extraordinarily telling about the core differences between media ethics and trust in the criminal justice system. And honestly, whether or not a society believes that criminals are deserving of a second chance. There is a lot to unpack there. I think there are so many emotions wrapped up in this conversation, rightfully so. So I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comment section of this video. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!